You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Well, it is Friday morning after Canada has beaten the United States 3-2 in overtime in the first edition of the Four Nations Face-Off Championship, and we are Toronto Sports Rush. I'm joined by EJ Hradek, Julie Stewart-Binks here, and EJ, what a game. What a tournament, but what a finish. Overtime. Connor McDavid seals the deal. Jordan Binnington absolutely kept his team in this one. Nathan MacKinnon gets the tournament MVP. What was your initial takeaway from seeing all that happen?
Well, as someone who's grown up here in the United States, watching hockey and watched the growth and development of hockey over the years, to see hockey get the attention nationally in this country in the sports media for the last several days throughout the time of this tournament has been really wonderful to see. I mean, yesterday, certainly if you judge by the conversation that takes place on ESPN, for example, who did broadcast the game, so they have a reason to promote it. But I worked at ESPN for 13 years. I don't think that anyone ever talked about hockey more in a 48-hour window than they talked about hockey on ESPN over the last couple of days. So that is really terrific to see. It's a reminder to me, again, I've been saying this for a good while now, the game has been on a constant uptick. It's not something that you measure, in a day-to-day thing. It just seems like, there's hockey is in different places in the U.S. now, and people are growing up with the game, and it's been on an uptick. It's been a sport that's gaining in popularity. It's just the sports world has exploded in the last 30 years, and sports, NFL has become kind of this monster, and college football has turned into something different over the last 20, 30 years, and you could say the same for many of the other sports. But it was really great to see, and it was a terrific game. It lived up to the hype. We didn't have 3 fights in 9 seconds again, so it was a little bit different. I think there were probably some fans that aren't as familiar with things that probably were like, "Where are those fights? What's going on?"
It's like, no, it's not going to happen in this game. There's too much on the line for this one, I felt. At least, I don't know. What did you think?
What about could have used one more? Why not?
Yeah,
but
could have used a fight.
It didn't happen, and so, but it was a really terrific game. The guys really laid it on the line, and the overtime was sensational. And you mentioned Jordan Binnington. I mean, he loves the TD Garden. I was there 5 years ago when he was in there in Game 7. I mean, he was just lights out against the Bruins. If he doesn't have the first period that he had against the Bruins in Game 7, the Blues probably don't win the Stanley Cup. And I thought the overtime really was the moment. Those several saves on Austin Matthews and the one on Brady Tkachuk. He was terrific, and he was the difference. And then, hockey is a game of mistakes, Julie, as you know. And, somehow Connor McDavid gets wide open in the slot about 12 feet out, and he's not going to miss. Great pass from Mitch Marner, who had a terrific game as well. So it was a great game. It lived up everything, went to overtime, and in the end, someone asked me yesterday my prediction, and I said, well, listen, I don't have a prediction, really. I just say it's going to be a toss-up. And I think that's what we're going to see when the U.S. and Canada play in hockey at the highest level, whether it be at the Olympics or the World Cup in hockey moving forward. Everything is cyclical. There'll be times when one has more of an advantage than the other. Injuries will play a part because the teams are so close. But in the end, I just think that these are the two preeminent hockey powers in the world right now, and it's really going to be close and exciting for us as hockey fans to watch at the Olympics and at the World Cup and moving forward.
Right, EJ is so perfectly said. That's exactly what we wanted to see. And we've seen that at the 2010 Olympics, where USA won in the round robin play and then Canada won in the final. And they do have that kind of back and forth sort of situation because everyone is so good. The play is certainly for USA has elevated exponentially, arguably the best that USA hockey has ever looked. And I want to dial into something that you said about Jordan Binnington, because that was sort of the Achilles heel for Team Canada heading into this. Really just, do they have the goaltending? Do they have enough in goal? Jordan Binnington, okay, so I was working last night while the game was going on, and I just want to
Mhm.
give myself an Emmy for having to do that while this game was going on. And I'm looking at the monitor.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm doing an interview with Ian Begley, who covers the Knicks, because the Knicks played last night. I live in New York City, and as I'm
Yeah.
interviewing him, I'm looking to the side where the monitor is for overtime, and I just like you can see my eyes like looking over, and just I could feel when the puck was going towards Binnington. I remember just being like, "Oh my gosh, like he is getting pounded right now." Like I just can't. I was just so stressed out. But I mean, when you're looking at
Yeah.
Binnington and him coming up like that, what would be sort of like your overall rating of him? Like he had to come out and make a lot of, sort of like athletic Jonathan Quick-esque saves, you might have to say. But I mean,
Yeah.
on a scale of 1 to 10, how much confidence do you have in him as your goaltender for Team Canada right now, even going forward?
Well, I think you have to have a lot. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when, I was an Islander fan as a kid and remember Billy Smith in those moments. And he was just such a money goalie because it's not always how many saves you make. It's when you make them. And Jordan Binnington, he made the big saves when he had to make them. Certainly in that game last night, down the stretch and in overtime, he's won a Stanley Cup. He's now won this tournament. You know, Julie, in this thing too, I mean, like people talked about that as like a big advantage. The U.S. had all these really good goalies. Canada wasn't sure which way they were going to go. These was a 4 game tournament for the teams that got to the final. 4 games. This wasn't
Yeah.
like a march of 80 games or even 30 games where,
Yeah.
a goaltender needs to be consistent over a bunch of time. I mean, Jordan Binnington was, as he proved in the playoffs when they needed him, he was really good. And in this particular case, I mean, he only had to be good really in one of the 4 games when you come to think of it. I mean, like they lost the game to Team USA, in the round robin. But in the end, people will remember that because it was a memorable night in Montreal. But when it counted, Jordan Binnington was there to make those saves. So, these type of tournaments, I think that's something for fans to remember. It's not a marathon and how a guy plays over a long time. You're asking someone to perform in a short window. And Jordan Binnington has proven at the highest levels that he can get it done. So congratulations to him, and really congratulations to John Cooper and that coaching staff because they never really wavered, at least publicly, on Jordan Binnington, right? Like he wasn't lights out in those first 3 games. He had
Hmm.
his moments when he was good, but he also had his moments when he struggled, and people were calling for them to maybe go to Aiden Hill. And John Cooper really never wavered. They stayed with Binnington, and he was rewarded for that decision because Binnington really was, to me, the difference in the game.
Right. And when you speak of John Cooper, first of all, he's just like Mike Sullivan, a great orator. He just really can get you going. I mean, there's a reason why both of them have been so successful for their NHL teams. And
Yeah.
also seeing him speak after the game, too, you really could get a sense of how much it meant to Canada, to Canadians, and taking kind of a step back of like, this is a hockey game that we won, but then in the bigger picture, everyone in Canada kind of will have woken up today with sort of a sense of just even more pride and joy, I think, because of the circumstances. And that's something that like we can't ignore, that this is really what was going on in terms of there's a lot of political tension going on. There's, all of these sort of the rhetoric about the 51st state. When you're kind of looking at it in the bigger scheme of like the history of hockey, the history of the world, like I feel as though this game will be looked back at even maybe potentially bigger than other Olympics just based on what's going on in the world. And because we had, Bill Guerin, the GM for Team USA, having Trump give a pump up speech to Team USA, there were politics involved in a lot of this stuff. It just felt as though, first of all, as Cooper said, Canada needed a win as the country. But this game had a lot more juice than just a hockey game.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, we live in very polarizing times, right? And I think, worrying times, really, in a lot of ways. And, for me, as someone who's grown up in the U.S., I mean, I'm very, I guess I can say I'm old enough to remember when the president of the United States wasn't belittling our, I think our trusted and dear ally to the north, Canada. And as someone who has been involved in hockey my whole life, I mean, I certainly have a certain, like a special relationship in my own mind. And I think hockey fans in the U.S. have a special relationship with Canada because I think it's the ultimate respect. There's so many of the great, great players that have come out of Canada over many, many years. Some of the legends of the sport that we love. We've gotten used to watching, games from Montreal and Toronto or Edmonton or Vancouver over many years of our lives. And, for me, it is disappointing to see the leaders in the U.S., making comments about the leaders in Canada that, for really, again, I don't really understand why those comments need to be made and to try to belittle or embarrass someone. And the same with, talking about Canada, maybe being annexed into the U.S. I don't really understand that thing. It's never been something, again.
Think of that.
I mean, again, like if you're older, like if you're an older person, it's very shocking kind of, because it's not something that, was ever on my radar in life. And, for younger people, maybe they have a different take on things, but, it certainly added, fuel to the hockey and to the, the way that people paid attention to it. And so, I guess in the end of the day, like I said, I've never seen hockey get more attention in a particular time. I think it's always been kind of a really good idea to try to play these kind of things in a window when the sports calendar in North America after the Super Bowl kind of empties out. People are looking for things to watch. It is the winter. It is hockey season. You're playing the guy in the United States, for example, the guy in Alabama maybe decides that you're like, hey, Team USA is playing. I want to watch that. It's really good. And they discover like, hey, this is really good. This is really competitive. And that guy has something in common now with the guy in Oregon or the guy in Massachusetts. So it's a big picture thing. The sports calendar is open. It's cold. You have great athletes. We have a great game. I just thought it's something that I wish they would have probably tried to do sooner, where the NHL and the NHLPA control the venues and the times, and where it makes it accessible for people to watch.
Right.
I think just a lot of things came together and it went really well. And people are saying, well, like, I think, Julie, there are people who don't really understand the, hockey or understand the international significance in hockey or the calendar of events that's been laid out by the league and the Players Association, that think this is kind of a replacement for the All-Star game and this is going to happen every year. This is a one-off. Like, the plan is to play in the Olympics next year. 2027 will be an open year. 28 will be a World Cup of Hockey, which will include, I think it's going to be 8 countries. So that'll be different. 29 would be an off year. 30 would be an Olympic year. So, there's been a lot of discussion. Oh, I can't wait for this next year. This is not coming back. Like that trophy, put that trophy in behind glass, because that's never going to be given out again, at least in this format. I would say that, when you think about other opportunities to take advantage of this great rivalry, maybe in those off years, and this is a lot to ask of the players because a lot of these players are going to be going through this cycle of playing a lot of these tournaments. Maybe you have a summit series type thing like we saw all the way back in the early 70s with Russia and Canada. Maybe you see something like that, a 2 out of 3 type series in the break. Maybe in 2027 and 29, those off years. But, I think it is, because it's so new for so many sports fans who aren't used to the hockey and aren't used to the rhythms of it. And I see it on the different broadcasts for the broadcasters who really don't talk about hockey a lot. It's interesting to think that, like, the way it's being portrayed is something, they really figured out this All-Star game stuff. And it's like, no, it's not quite what it is. But it's certain. But it fills the void, and it fills a void in the schedule. And I think for that, the NHL really hit on something, and they knocked it out of the park.
Right, especially with it going up kind of around the same time as the NBA All-Star game and break. And I think that's why maybe people are thinking, oh, this is the NHL version. But we did have to mention, of course, all of the things that were going on. EJ said it really well, and just the idea of just this not being a hockey game in a vacuum. It's in times that are very difficult and kind of confusing, and especially for a lot of the fans. I know that it's been an odd time. So I think that the way Team Canada handled a lot of it was very professional. And I'm not just saying that because I'm from Canada. I think there were a lot of words exchanged. There was a lot of things said, and everyone seemed to be they seemed very quiet about it heading into this game. And maybe that was something that Cooper kind of like kept in the room. Like I would imagine if you're going to say anything about any country, they're going to respond. And I think that probably had that extra level within the game. We saw the Tkachuk brothers just being a little verbose with some of the things they're saying, especially after the fights in the Saturday night game, the group chat, everything around that was just this pressure cooker. And it was, as you said, I had people texting me who have never watched a hockey game before that were like, we're going to Boston, right? Yeah. Like, this is the best thing I've ever seen in my life. Like, why wouldn't we go to this thing? I'm curious for you as we just sort of wrap up a bit of this tournament, who do you think on both sides, Canada and USA, increased their stock value in this tournament that had this tournament not happened and had they not played the way they played, they wouldn't have been at this particular level?
Well, just to touch on something you said about the Canada and the way they handle things, I do think the Canadian players and coaches really were very professional throughout this because it's easy these days to go down a path and really create a stir, and some people do it on purpose because that's the world we live in now. You gain attention that way, and so I thought, again, from my perspective, I thought, they did handle it, all that stuff very well, very professionally. And, to be really totally honest about it, Julie, there are guys in that Canadian dressing room that live in the United States that may well be fans of the current president. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that's probably any big secret. I mean, it's a polarizing time. It's hard to know who feels what about anything. So, but I think, those guys didn't play into a lot of the stuff. They just try to go about their business as they had to, because this was a really hard game and a hard tournament to play against. Those two teams are really closely matched. But to answer your question, I mean, like, I find it funny when these things, like Jacob Slavin, all of a sudden, like, nobody knew Jacob Slavin was good. Jacob Slavin is like, he's been good for a long time now. He's a real, let me just say this clearly. He's a really good defenseman. I mean, I always find it funny because there's so much attention. It's a big stage, right? It's like when Scott Niedermayer years ago moved from the Devils to the Anaheim Ducks. And I was fortunate. I got to see Scott Niedermayer play in New Jersey for like 10 years, whenever he was here, right? And you knew what a player he was. He's amazing. He's a Hall of Famer. And he goes to Anaheim, and all of a sudden, some of these guys who cover hockey in the West are like, boy, this Scott Niedermayer, he's better than I thought. Well, yeah, because you hadn't really paid it that much attention to him before.
As someone who worked in Anaheim, there's no way they would have seen him play before that.
Yeah, there you go. So, I mean, but I'm talking about people who really cover the game. It was kind of amazing to me. But at any rate, I would say that, Slavin is certainly one guy that got a lot of attention, in the media for the way that he played, and it's not surprising. That's who he is. He's big, strong, good skater, great defender. Just every night, when you watch a guy, like, I'm sure the guys in Carolina even think it's even funnier because they watch him on a night-to-night basis. So, I thought he was certainly someone that elevated his stature. I thought Dylan Larkin, some of these guys that maybe don't play in the playoffs, right? Like Dylan Larkin hasn't played a playoff game. Brady Tkachuk hasn't played. Brady Tkachuk was like a monster out there throughout this whole tournament. And, so I think those guys certainly got a chance to elevate their status in these moments. And I thought, Julie, going forward towards the Olympics, the guys that played in this tournament, the guys that played well, I mean, certainly they put themselves in great position moving forward to play in the Olympics. But there are a lot of guys that I look on both Team USA and Team Canada that I'll tell you, I don't know if they're going to be there in another 12 months, if they're going to be in Italy. So it'll be interesting to watch.
Who would you say do you think might be on the cusp, or like who might be?
Well, I think a lot of guys are on the cusp on both teams. I mean, I said at the start I would have taken John Carlson as a bigger, stronger right shot guy in defense. I think he's had a
Yeah,
great season, and I would have taken him. And I think I looked at the way Adam Fox played. I thought it was a struggle for Adam Fox in this
definitely.
tournament. So there's two right shot guys, for example. So we'll see. I mean, maybe Adam Fox had dealt with an injury last year. You never know where guys are completely health wise, but I thought it was a little bit of a struggle for him. So that could open the door on defense. Quinn Hughes wasn't even there in this tournament. So like,
Yeah.
obviously he's going to be part of this. So that's going to change things. I think Jake Sanderson had some moments when he played very well. So, I mean, he opened some eyes for people. He's a young player that's kind of on the move up. I think for some of these older guys, the pace was really challenging. And for Brad Marchand, I don't know if he's going to be part of
I
it for Team
know.
Canada next year. He certainly
I was
brings an
kind of
element to their team,
surprised
but you know,
with
yeah.
him.
Yeah, I mean, I just think but you got to remember also again, it's a short tournament. It's a handful of games. You don't know exactly where everybody's at. Everybody seemed to be having all kinds of different illness and little injuries in this
Yeah.
tournament. So, it's hard to really know where everybody was at, but I thought, I think there's going to be, these management groups are going to go back and they're going to be happy with a lot of their selections, but I think they're going to be looking to tweak things. And, I would suggest to Canada to have Tom Wilson on their team.
Yes, yes.
I thought they got pushed around in this tournament, quite frankly. I really did. And people will say, well, there's no fighting in the Olympics, so why would you have Tom Wilson? It's not about that. How many times did
No.
Brady Tkachuk go in the corner and just blow somebody up?
Oh my
I mean, like he
God.
went in there, he was, hitting Drew Doughty like it was like he stole his lunch or something. He kept going in and hammering him, and it makes a difference to be able to have a physical component to your team, and that's the biggest shocking thing to me, Julie, as someone who's watched U.S. Canada my whole life, is that Team USA, I thought, had the physical edge in these games and played, were pushing Canada around a little bit. And you go back to that first meeting where McDavid got knocked on his rear end a couple of different times. I mean, not that you're going to have a fight after that, but like, I just think they needed some bigger bodies to get to the net and to create some forechecking issues for Team USA. And so, like, Wilson would be a guy that I would look at. Maybe even in a checking role, Adam Lowry, because he's a big, strong man. I just think
Yeah,
they need
that's
a
a
little
good
more
point.
size on their team. And I'll be curious. I'll be curious to see what they do. And obviously, with Jordan Binnington playing so well, I think he would be the front runner to be their goaltender. But I mean, that's still up in the air because, we saw Thompson played really well this year. He didn't get picked. Mackenzie Blackwood went to Colorado and really found his way. He could be in the mix. I mean, it'll be fascinating to see what they do with the goaltending. But I think on both sides, there's some decisions to be made.
I think you made a great point about the physicality with even just not necessarily the fighting, but the hits and seeing McDavid just get like he just like a ping pong ball like or just like in a
Yeah.
washer and Charlie McAvoy out there who obviously wasn't in the game for this last
Yeah.
one, and there were a number of injuries as we know for
Yeah.
Team Canada without Shea Theodore injured in the first game, and then Alex Pietrangelo, Josh Morrissey wasn't in this last game, and then for the USA
Yeah.
the same thing with Charlie McAvoy out, Quinn Hughes. Like
Yeah.
there were so many various different
Yeah.
injuries. It's like one of those guys is in could totally change the dynamic of how even one play happens, right? Because I think when I'm listening to you speak,
Yes.
it's like it's just moments in the game. And I know John Cooper kind of talked about just like,
Yeah.
little things, but it really is moments because it's not a 7-game series between two teams. It was literally just two
No.
games between two teams. That's like
That's
literally
right.
what it came down to.
Yeah.
So it's hard to sort of
Yeah.
take away too much from some of it because it was such a short amount of time. I will say Thomas Harley got on my radar. I never really even gave him 1 ounce
Yeah.
of my brain ahead of time. Not necessarily as like the
Yeah.
star of the show, but I'd say now we
Yeah.
got to turn
Yeah.
our attention
He's a good
toward that.
player. Good
He
player.
is. He is toward the
Yeah.
NHL, and they are. The teams have been skating. They're starting back in action. What is it?
Yeah.
Saturday? Holy bananas! So they're tomorrow.
Saturday.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
okay. So
Leafs have three
some.
games. Leafs have 3 games in 4 days. They're going to be right out of the gate.
Okay. So Leafs come back without injuries too that we know of. Marner and Matthews in that final game. That's good for them. But other teams will be a bit shorthanded. who do you think might be dealing with, I mean, other than the Vegas Golden Knights, but like, who do you think might be dealing with some more injuries that could impact their NHL team now?
Well, I mean, obviously in Boston, right? Charlie McAvoy being out for what they say is weeks. And I think that's one of those stories that I think we're going to hear more about moving forward, because that's the fear for the owners, is that have players participate in this and get injured and then miss significant time. And the whole thing that went on with McAvoy, where he was injured in the game against Finland, and then he played well in the game against Canada, and apparently had injured his shoulder, and I would imagine they tried to shoot him up or freeze it to a certain degree, and then he got an infection in there. I mean, like, that is something. If you're the Boston Bruins and you're the management team there, and you're not happy about that, just because you don't, like, it's one thing for a guy to get hurt. It's another thing for your organization to feel like, hey, did he get the proper medical care from the doctors that work for Team USA, but they work for another team. I believe they're the Minnesota doctors that, obviously with Bill Guerin being the manager, that, they would employ in this situation. And I don't, listen, these guys are doctors. People make mistakes in life. That's what happens sometimes. But I mean, if you're the Bruins, you would probably prefer that your people had seen him immediately, and that's not what played out. So I don't know how you solve that moving forward, but I think that's something that's going to be a story that people will continue to kind of dig in on. But it certainly is going to hurt the Bruins. And Hampus Lindholm, we're not really sure where he's at. He didn't skate the other day. So, like, to be without McAvoy, and then if Lindholm can't really shoulder the load, I mean, the Boston Bruins, I think that certainly changes the trajectory for what they might do at the trade deadline, which is coming up now, March 7th. It's only a couple weeks away. Like, a lot of, people you talk to around the Bruins, they feel like, you know what, hey, we should probably try to sell, because we don't think we have a really good team this year here, and we've had injuries, and maybe we need to shuffle the deck a little bit. But, it's certainly without McAvoy for a stretch of time, and if Lindholm is not, really ready to go, and who knows where Marchand is. We talked about him already. I mean, he certainly has been a great player for them, but he's not the player that he was, 5 years ago. Who is? That's just the way it works when guys get into their later 30s.
Except for Sidney Crosby,
I think that's certainly one
proved us all wrong.
Well, I mean, even Sidney Crosby, I thought the pace of the games against the U.S., he wasn't quite as impactful in those games as he was in games against Finland and Sweden. But, Sidney Crosby is one of the top 5 players to ever play this game. And, he certainly, it's interesting to me, Julie, about Sid, because I think he's got a lot to offer still at this stage, but the window is closing. I mean, let's face it. We can all do the math. He's not going to be 48-year-old Sidney Crosby out there dominating. I mean, he's got a short window of time. They're not going anywhere in Pittsburgh. And I think it's really going to be a hard decision for everybody involved there, because, like, I just don't see Sidney playing out the remainder of his NHL career in Pittsburgh on an also-ran. So we'll see how it plays out. But the window is small, and with each passing day, that's one less day that he can really maximize where he's at this stage of his life in his NHL career. So we'll see. But certainly another great moment for Sid, and another, a gold medal of sorts to put on his mantle.
So what do you think for Sid? Like, if he doesn't stay in Pittsburgh, where would you see him go?
Well, listen, he's going to make that decision. I don't think anything is imminent there. I think they'll get through the season, and then in the summer, maybe the Pittsburgh Penguins as a team will have to consider what they're going to do with Evgeny Malkin and Chris Letang and Erik Karlsson. But, I mean, in terms of landing spots for Sidney Crosby, I think really there are only 2 for me that come to mind. And that one is the obvious one in Colorado with Nathan MacKinnon. I think that's certainly a place. And I think in Minnesota, where he played at Shattuck St. Mary's, familiar with that area. He's familiar with Bill Guerin, their former teammates. I think obviously Marc-Andre Fleury is retiring, but he would be somebody that could tell him a little bit more about the Minnesota Wild and what they do and what it would be like to play there. So I think those are the 2 places to me that stand out. But again, when you say something like this, Julie, people right away say, oh, EJ says he's going here or going there. Sidney Crosby is going to decide what he's going to do. He might just stay his whole career in Pittsburgh. I'm not sure what he wants to do. But I would say if he's going to move, I don't see him going into another Eastern Conference team. I don't think he's going to go play for a Canadian team. So it starts to limit it. I look at Colorado, I look at Minnesota. Those are the ones that come to mind for me as the places that make the most sense, that have, I think, kind of a need for a player like him at this stage too. So we'll see how it plays out. But it will be, in the end of the day, it will be up to Sidney Crosby to decide what he's going to do and where he's going to end up. And he hasn't shown any, he hasn't at least publicly said anything about leaving Pittsburgh. So that's where we're at.
And I don't think he ever will, because he is very good at not really. His poker face is
yes,
perfect. But I thought it was funny. I had a coach from Team Canada, I'm not going to say who, sent me a picture of him and Crosby on the ice during practice and said, like, recruiting. And I was like, thought that was so funny. Like, might as well take advantage of. There's a lot of NHL coaches that were involved in this, and I thought that was like a really funny little bit. I'm not going to say who, but you can narrow down a couple different guys out there. I'd say
there's only a handful of them.
Yeah, there's, only about three, But, okay, so you said the trade deadline coming up, March 7th. What are you, I'm going to do my Wolf Blitzer. Like, what are you hearing? What are you seeing out there?
Well, I think there's obviously a lot of conversation, as there always is. There's been a lot of big trades already, right? So that's taken some pieces off the market. It's so darn close, especially in the East, where a lot of teams still think they can get in the playoffs, and they should feel that way because the standings, just look at the standings, they're close. But, I think there'll be a lot of little moves to be made. I think, the Seattle Kraken are interesting. They've got, Brandon Tanev is a player that, has some value for sure. They have some other pieces there that I think people would be interested in. There's some veteran players in like San Jose or Chicago that may draw some interest from teams. I'll be curious to see, like Toronto. I think Toronto is still looking to be a player here to add, like, more kind of character pieces to their group. So, what can they pull off, and what are they willing to move, to do that? We'll see. I think a lot of teams, Julie, feel like it's kind of wide open. That's kind of the way I feel about it. I don't look at the league right now and say, there's your Stanley Cup winner, or there's your two teams that I think will be in the final. I think we're in for a wild playoffs this year because we've just had this tournament. Some of these players have had injuries or had issues. I mean, it changed. The dynamic of this season is going to be different. It's already tight. I think we're in for a wild ride. So I think that, there'll be a lot of teams interested, a lot of buyers, not as many sellers. Should make for an interesting marketplace on March 7th. But oftentimes it's those little pieces that make a difference. And so I'll be curious to see, particularly the Leafs, because, again, I think that, if they're like, I see it probably the same way they do, is they have a chance this year. And they're playing well, and they're getting some guys healthy, and, add another piece or two along the way. And I think a lot of teams feel that way. So we'll see who's going to win those battles for the players that, could be helpful to your team moving forward.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting when you say just like the idea of we've kind of had our attention redirected to the Four Nations during this time. And now it's like back to thinking about trade deadline and back to thinking about the rest of the season, which normally we would have had all of this pent up energy looking at trades and whatnot. And it does feel like a bit of a fresh table setting at this point. And then thinking about guys that have gotten injured and how that's affected teams and all that kind of stuff. And I do believe, the Leafs are looking for, a centerman, potentially a 3C or 2C, and then maybe offensive defenseman. Yeah. We'll have to see what happens, but it's kind of fun now to see what's going to go on. Everything might have been put into a blender, minus the Washington Capitals, who have been the only team that didn't have anyone in the tournament, which is really kind of crazy, which we should just put all our money on the Capitals.
Best team in the league. Best team in the league. They didn't have anybody there sitting there ready to go. So it'll be interesting. I'll be curious to see the Caps too. Can they continue as games get amped up? Can they continue to be the team that has been so good at winning close games? Can Thompson continue to be as good as he's been in goal? The Ovechkin chase is going to continue. Can he get there before the end of the year? I mean, I would say he's on a pace to do it before the end of this season. So we'll see where that plays out. But there's a lot on the table right now. It'll be interesting to see how many of these fans that jumped in for the for the Four Nations tournament are now going to kind of start to follow some of the hockey storylines like Ovechkin and like the playoffs and the trade deadline and the Stanley Cup chase. It'll be interesting to see how much of a draw that we get from fans who are kind of new and excited by what they just saw over the last 10 days.
Yeah, we hope that happens. And also, I could see some of the guys from Canada and USA just coming out in that first game, if they're healthy, and just going like as hard as they have been. And just like, wait, oh gosh, yeah, I'm not competing against like the exact same type of guys, which would be kind of funny to see. But EJ, we will let you go. Thank you so much for breaking down. We could talk about so many different factors with this game, with this tournament. Overall, we are just happy that hockey was at the forefront. And as hockey people, we love to see more and more people involved in the sport, interested in the sport. Yep. And so the Four Nations face-off was a complete success, I believe, and hats up glove tap to the NHL. It was fantastic. So I'm glad that they did that, and can't wait to see what this means for the rest of the season and of course for the Olympics. But thank you for joining us, and we will see you on NHL Network.
You got it, Julie. See ya.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.